Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Grief Let's Talk About podcast. You guys know who it is. This is Tony Lynch. I am the host of this podcast. And yes, we are your number one podcast with bringing you stories around death, down, and grief with all the messiness that comes in between with some amazing people out here changing people's lives one heartbeat at a time. Now, this is a live stream. So if you're tuning in, you have any questions for either myself or my guest, please put them in the comment section. We'll be sure to answer them as we go. Now, before I bring on my next guest, I got one more thing to say. This is for educational purposes only. Now, without further ado, guys, help me welcome my guest, Kalen, to the show. Kalen, how you doing?
Hey, Tony, I'm doing great. How are you?
I am doing amazing. I get to talk with you today.
Woo!
So, before we get started, introduce yourself to the audience. Tell people who you are, where you're from, and about the work that you do.
Sure. Yeah, I'm Kalen Olson, and I'm originally from Vancouver, Washington. I live still in the Northwest area, Bend, Oregon, and I am a spiritual teacher, speaker, artist, and guide. And I really guide people through transformation, heart-centered living, so they can access and see and realize their heart's desires manifest in their life.
I love that. And thank you for the work that you do. Really, really important. Now, let's start this thing. How did you get into what was your journey like leading up into what you do today?
Oh my gosh, yeah. It was a lot. So I grew up just like playing outside, loved being in the outdoors. I would run around, cartwheels, dancing, doing rain dances outside, being into art, painting, drawing, you name it. And I just like really, although, there were familial challenges like a lot of people have, there was still like this essence of vibrancy that I experienced in childhood. It felt like nothing was missing. I was really sure about myself. And as I started to get older, I started to, put down the art supplies and pick up like more books and start to, study and work really hard. And I started to kind of lose that essence of when I was a child and feeling like more confident, more sure of myself. And I started really replacing it with external validation and really wanting to prove myself, specifically like around work. And although like I love that I got such a great work ethic, it really came at the cost of also losing parts of myself. And so I got to a point when I had moved to Albuquerque after college, because it was during that recession time in 2008 where it was like, you're lucky if you get a job at this point. And so I was really willing to relocate. And so after working in Albuquerque in a job for a few years, I started to notice that I had either what seemed to be laid out in front of me, either a promotion or going back to school to specialize. That's kind of what I was like thinking based off of, I guess, cultural understanding of career movement. And what was really interesting is neither one of those felt right to me. And it was just like this moment of like, okay, if the normal career trajectory doesn't feel right, like, what do I do and who am I? So I kind of came to this point of like, not really knowing who I was and just kind of questioning a lot and being like, why can't I trust myself? Why doesn't this feel right? And it was a really interesting moment. And simultaneously at the same time, I was experiencing a lot of anxiety around decision making. And my mom like lovingly nudged a meditation book toward me. And I was like, I'm good, Mom, I'm good. And then finally I decided to pick it up and read it and try to practice meditation. And I really realized, I was like, oh my God, like somebody else has been running the show here. Like, this is insane what was going on in my mind. It was so much anxiety, even dark thoughts that I really wasn't aware of. And up to that point, I thought that the life outside of me was just what it was, and that my internal world wasn't impacting anything. And so it was really this like big reckoning moment that like, I really need to dive in and dive deeper into understanding who I am. And so I really wanted to keep pursuing that path of understanding how to trust myself more. And it was really wild. I was trying to kind of resurface parts of myself because I grew up in the Christian church. So I was like, okay, maybe I can go back to some elements of faith here. And that was feeling like there was something new unearthing for me. And there were some questioning parts of that chapter as well. And so I ended up moving back to Portland because I was like, I just don't feel like I can even decide what I really want to do in life. And so after moving back, I just took some time to really be with myself. And I started doing more art classes. I started painting because I was like, maybe opening up creativity and just being more attuned to those things that I loved from childhood will help me kind of orient this direction. And there was an intuition about like doing healing work, doing something artistic that was kind of like pinging in me. And through several years of practicing meditation, I was like biting my nails less, and I was noticing these small little glimpses of like starting to kind of calm down a little bit, I guess. And then my dad ended up passing from leukemia, and something like really, really broke open in me that I had never experienced or accessed before. And some people call that a spiritual awakening. And that's really what I went through. And I started to notice that like grief can be not a death sentence, but it's actually a profound portal of transformation if we let it be. And so by accessing my feelings, because I had been go, go, go before that, I had been, just ignoring feeling anything. I had been ignoring even crying. And so just like through all the tears of the catharsis of feeling my feelings, I started to really come into like, oh, like if I can heal, if I can start feeling exuberant in my job, if I can start feeling exuberant in my relationships, in my health, like, and I was in stereotypically one of the most stressful jobs that people can have. I was teaching at the time. And so I was like, if I can experience this, anybody can. And so it really motivated me to work with people so that they can find joy and purpose in their lives. And so that's like what's really lit me up. And the journey's just continued and deepened and expanded really since then.
I love that. You said a couple things, and I want to touch on those things. The first one, the dark thoughts, right? And the reason why I bring that up is because I know there's, including myself, right? I've struggled with the dark thoughts early on in my journey, and it led me down a path of just self-destruction, just with drinking and, being violent and making some decisions that did not benefit me, that later on in life, it came back home and was like, you got to pay for this stuff that you've done. Mm-hmm. So I want to elaborate on that. When you say dark thoughts, explain, elaborate on that for a little bit.
Sure. Yeah, it was really interesting because, up to that point, I had, just been what I felt like was a good person overall. Mm-hmm. And I had gone to college, like done all the stereotypically like good things, like go to college. And what was like really interesting is that while I was in Albuquerque, I started noticing the thoughts, and I was like, some of these, like there was the classic, like not being enough and those kind of thoughts that are pretty, most people can relate to that in some form, or they've experienced that. Right. But it was really interesting because it was also like thoughts about killing myself. And what was weird was that they didn't even feel like me. Like I was like, these aren't even my thoughts. Like they don't even belong to me. And that's what was really trippy, was like, why would I even have these if I've had a good life? And so it's like, it made me realize like this can happen to anybody. Like, and that I think we think we're our thoughts. And it was a profound realization of like, oh my God, there's no way I can be these thoughts if I have all these blessings around in my life. So something else really needs to be unearthed here. And so it was like a precipice of pain, essentially, of like really ignoring who I was, my purpose, my heart. And that I think when we have those kind of thoughts, it's really like a surrendering to a part of us that does want to die, but it's not actually physically killing ourselves. It's really listening to a bigger part that wants to emerge, is what's being invited there.
And there's a couple of questions, a couple of comments over here that I want to talk about. My friend Shai just tuned in. Shai, thank you for tuning in. Um, she says her darkest was to end her life as well. So I think that's a really common denominator when it comes down to people. I think we've all experienced that at some point throughout our journey of life, right? Especially when you've been beat down or you have things that you have not addressed.
Mm-hmm.
But also, she goes on to say it's even her ex told her to pop a pill and told her to kill herself, right? What do you think when people have the audacity to tell another person to do that? What do you think that comes from? Is that like something that a self reflection of them?
Yeah.
Because it takes a lot for you to go and tell another person you should kill yourself, right? And for the life of me, I just think about that and just go, who who does that? There has to be something deeply hurt with that individual to make them reflect on another individual in that way.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the truest expression of life, is living. And so anything that is in opposition to that is really not true. And it's people who are deeply hurt and confused about what is real. And that I think when we come from that place, it's like we can almost have a little bit more compassion and know like what's real and what's not real. Doesn't mean we have to interact with people, but it gives the capacity to have space and be like, that's not mine, and to start kind of searching for like, what are the life-giving thoughts here that can be present? Because it's like, that's what life is. You look, everything's blooming. The trees are blooming. The animals are growing. That's life's natural baseline. And so anything not of that, it really just can't even be true. It's not a natural expression of how life was designed to be.
Right. Which actually goes, with when a person um, when a person has gone through abuse,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes they can get wrapped up into the words that other people say, and it will play a heavy part in their next actions. I've seen it time and time again, and it's a form of mental abuse in a
Mm-hmm.
lot of ways. And sometimes people don't know how to overcome that. They as Shai said, it's a very dark place for an individual to be, because when you're left with those thoughts, you're left with the impact, depending on the relationship that you have with this individual. It can be very influential,
Mm-hmm.
right? And you will, and that's the only things that you hear all the time. You would begin to believe them, right? We are our own worst enemies. I know for me, I was my own worst enemies. I used to tell myself, you're not worth it. Like, look at the things that you've done. Like you might as well just be done with it. No one's going to care that you're not here anyway. And the world would be a better off place without you. I didn't even think about my younger sister. As a matter of fact, I used to always say, it's probably better that she doesn't know because I left for a very long time, and life wasn't kind. It wasn't kind to me at all, and I did not understand it because although I made some very destructive decisions, I was willing to pay the price for the decisions that I've made. What I didn't realize is that it was taking me down a path where I didn't know who I was, right? So you talk about the loss of identity, not like trying to find yourself, and I think for a lot of people when we're starting to develop, that loss of identity is the first grief that we will ever experience, right? Especially as we're growing from childhood to teenage to adulthood and things like that, because the world doesn't give you a blueprint. We have an idea of what we want to do, but just as well as I do, those things change, right? And we get to a place where we're lost. So let's talk about the loss of identity. What are your thoughts on that, and how do you help others navigate that world?
Yeah. The loss of identity felt completely disorienting. It's like not knowing what's right up from down and left from right. And it's like, who am I anymore? And what really helped me was to go back to those little glimpses where I did know who I was, of like reconnecting to art, reconnecting to creativity as little doorways and openings to really remember a new version of myself. Because it's like, obviously, we're not going to be the same as we were as children, we're adults, but yet we can still have childlike joy. And so accessing those little pieces of remembering, I think, can be really powerful doorways to start accessing those dormant parts of ourselves that may have been not tapped into as an adult.
I want to talk about that for a minute because a lot of it sounds like it's when people are experiencing that, it's a lot of unhealed trauma that comes along with that, right? Unhealed abuse that they may suffer at the hands of someone else, bullying, right? Things like that. Because I know I talk to a lot of youth, um, especially in the LGBTQ community, and a lot of them are being abused, and they're just children running around here, and they just want to be accepted, right? They just want to be accepted for who they are, which is not a bad place to be. But I think as people, the society that we live in nowadays can be a very cruel place. How do we help people navigate that? We got a comment over here
Yeah.
from Shy. She goes on to say, the only person that's ever done it was the father of her son. That can be very, very detrimental as well, because this is somebody that you trust, and things like that, or have emotional attachment to. And they sometimes, the I want to say, sometimes they turn out to be the narcissist in your life. And one thing about narcissists is that they don't care, right? You know what I'm saying? They only care about how much they can control and take from you. And she also goes on to say that she lost her identity to the point where she actually forgot how to draw again, right? And I find that, even including with yourself, a lot of people that I talk to are very, very creative, or start off very creative. I know I did. And at some point, life consumed it, and I no longer wanted to be creative. I wanted to be more destructive than to be creative. I was like, if I can destroy it, I don't have to deal with it, right? But there's also a deep pull inside of me that says, this is not who I want to be, right? I want to be something that I want to be someone different, but I didn't know. I didn't know what to do. I don't think a lot of us do. What are your thoughts and opinions on connecting the creativity into the path that you're on?
Yeah. Well, there's two components that I think are really important, because I heard you also talk about like wanting to feel accepted. And that's a really big component in our becoming, and that desire is so pure and so beautiful. And as adults, getting to do that is a path for me that's combined creativity and forgiveness. Like, I had to have both in tandem in order to really access that. And so the creativity is beautiful because, it can start opening up that more softness, or more, joy, love, like in the creativity. So that's a really beautiful component. But the other component that goes with the creativity is really forgiveness work. Because as adults, we may never get that apology that we want. We may never get these things that we want so that we can feel accepted. And I think that is a really big piece of our becoming, is that really reconciling with that like, we can't ask people to change around us of these patterns of abuse and the patterns that have echoed within us that may have been, passed on in our minds and in our bodies. But we can offer forgiveness, which is really hard. It's not easy. It was really, really hard for me to start forgiving people in my life. And I started just deciding that I wanted to feel happy and I wanted to feel good in my relationships and I wanted to feel empowered. And if people saw me, that was great, but I was really wanting to do it for myself because I really wanted that. And so I started really daily practicing forgiveness of the people around me that it felt like had hurt me. And I noticed how hard it was, that I really wanted to be right. And I had to be willing to keep showing up every day to forgive, even when it felt really difficult and I didn't want to. And when it was like, well, they did this to me and I shouldn't forgive them. But it's like, we're in a world right now where like, you know, conflict is at a climax and like somebody's going to have to step down to forgive, so that it's not about saying the other person's right, but it's about honoring our own inner peace. And when we can do that, and that's what I found, is that like when I started forgiving the people around me, even when I didn't want to, I still did my best. It's then something did start to break through where I actually could start forgiving people. And with that forgiveness came my own self-acceptance. So I was able to get that acceptance that I really wanted and stand in my own empowerment and stand in who I felt like I was. And sometimes a lot of the relationships started mirroring that, where people like, oh, wow, she's really honoring herself. Like, and they started to meet me there. Some people couldn't meet me all the way there. But some people took steps, and that like really meant a lot to me. And so I think the process is combining the creativity with the forgiveness as kind of like in tandem for our evolution in our becoming.
I like that. I like that. I want to ask, because as you was talking about that, I started thinking about my own personal journey. And again, you know, when we talk about forgiveness, I think a lot of it comes from expectation, right? We expect people to be a certain way. I've learned over a period of time, you just accept people for who they are.
Mm-hmm.
People are people, right? And no matter how you look at it, they're going to be who they are. So it depends on the relationship that you have with that individual. It would depend on how you perceive their actions. It's just like, if you know someone is a thief, right? Would you keep allowing that person to come into your home when you know that they're just going to take everything? Right. So you get to make a decision on that as well, right? It becomes, you have to become self-aware, but also situationally aware as well, right? So you can make a choice to say, that's not what I want. You get to surround yourself with people that are good, right? And so once in a while, don't get me wrong, once in a while people sneak in there. They really love to sneak in there, right? Because they're like, ooh, I like that, right? And the problem is that a lot, well, the biggest challenge that I see is the discernment that people practice, right? And so, you know, the forgiveness aspect of it is that you're absolutely right. Stop expecting an apology from people who don't think that they've done anything wrong. You know, and this will allow you to develop a sense of peace within yourself. So whenever those things do happen, you can always ask yourself, at least for me, I can always ask myself, was I the best person? Was I the best human being to this individual? If the answer is yes, then I'm okay with that. I'm okay with your decisions, you know, because I'm not the one who has to live with it. I can accept your decisions. I don't have to live with them. You do, right? That is your own choice. And so if that's a choice that you decide to make, then by all means you live with that choice. You're just gonna have to do it without me, right? And it gives me a sense of refocus on the direction and the path that I'm on. And I just go, okay, I can, you know, because life life isn't a bad place. It's an interesting one, nonetheless, right? It comes with its own set of challenges, but it's not a bad place. Life isn't fair or unfair. Life is life. It depends on the perception that you have of it with the people that are intertwined with it. And you have to understand that you are going to cross paths with certain individuals along the way, depending on which direction that you're going. and everyone serves a purpose, right? And I'm talking about, I've been there, done that. I've had I've had people come in there and kick me down and drag me through the mud, and you know, and then I developed my own way of thinking of saying, this is the reason why I have a hard time with this, because everybody does the same thing. Um, but it tells me it's okay. It's okay. Life goes on. You're going to develop, you're going to grow, you're going to learn. You just have to see the blessing and the lesson that comes along with it. And if you can able to learn from it, then you can develop a stronger sense of the direction that you're going in, which makes it a lot more interesting. Like I was telling you earlier, I'm with Tony. I'm like a tigger. I'm constantly bouncing, right? I'm constantly going, oh wow, I even told the joke earlier, about when I was driving home, and I decided to go run around the roundabout, just because it was there. It's like, might as well, right? And that was a lot of fun. But I also have a sense of, I really don't care what people think of me, right? I know who I am. That's it. That's all that really matters.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts and opinion on that?
I just love everything you just said, because the reason it feels so powerful, because if you know that you're doing the best, if you know you're doing what's right and being a good person, then the focus is not on the other person anymore. It's on you, right, and who you are and what you can control. And that's really where your true power lies.
Yeah. How do we get people to embrace the mindset of that?
It's really a willingness of fuck, I've had the other way. Do I want the other way? It's like, you've got two meals here. Which one do you want to eat? Do you want to keep eating what you've had? Or do you oh, maybe this might be a little more enticing? And so it's really a journey of deciding if you're ready. And only the individual can make that decision about do I want to keep having this same meal over? Am I willing to do Groundhog Day anymore? Or do I have this one precious life and I'm willing to try another way because other people have modeled that this might work? And I'm willing to see those as guideposts, as companions on the journey in my own becoming. We're the writers of our script and we get to decide every day. That's an exciting journey to be part of, even as many times as you fucked up. It really doesn't matter, because if we look at the nature of the universe, it's life is ultimately forgiving. There's new growth every day. The leaves fall. There's this symphony of renewal. And that same renewal can be part of our story too. It doesn't have to just happen outside of us in nature. We're part of nature. And I think we've felt sometimes so cut off from that connection that it's the reminder of that. And even going out and being in nature, going for a walk and having that reminder of how sacred life is and how life ultimately wants to take care of you. It's do you want to keep having your face in the pavement, or are you ready for life to start inviting something new in? That's an exciting journey and something to ponder.
I love that. And as you was talking about that, I was thinking about something that I heard from another great speaker, and he was talking about the suffering of people, right? And in order to get to the next stage of life, you're going to have to suffer. You're going to have to go through the grind. He has a really good quote where he says, you have to be common amongst uncommon people, right? And it makes you really think about that for a bit, right? You have to go out here and you have to embrace the suck. So I appreciate that. Since I told you, you should have your own show and TV. Oh my God, thank you for that. That's truly amazing. But it's true though, right? You have to embrace the suck, because inside of there's answers that you've been searching, and yang in life, right? You're gonna have to go through some really crazy stuff in order to get to the good stuff, right? And it's that walking with blind faith, and what ends up happening is that unless you let go of all expectations or any sort of idea of what you think is supposed to happen, you'll never really receive the gift that's on the other side, right? But you may have to plant the grass seed, you may have to water it, and things like that. But that's where the growth comes in, right? It's not that the grass is green on the other side. It just means that the other side is yours. And it's up to you to grow the grass, right? It's up to you to build the life that you want, because that's your responsibility. And through the struggle, through the suffering, you will become a totally different version of yourself in order to be in order to receive what you're supposed to have. And I want to talk more about that. It is at the 30-minute mark, so we're going to take a small break, and we're going to come back and we're going to dive deeper into that. For everyone else, thank you guys for tuning in. And again, if you haven't already, head on over to the YouTube channel, hit that subscribe button, hit that bell notification. And as always, we'll be back after these moments.
Inspired by our Community Impact Center in Old Town Fort Collins, where 12 nonprofits collaborate to address pressing community issues, we're replicating this model here at the Loveland Youth Campus. Our vision extends beyond individual programs. We're breaking down barriers by creating community hubs where families can access multiple resources under one roof, and nonprofits can streamline efforts, share expenses, collaborate in new ways, and ultimately put more resources into impactful programs. Essential services like literacy support, mental health care, and access to nutritious foods will all be offered under one roof. And that's in addition to quality care for children ages 0 to 18, provided by our partners at Teaching Tree Early Childhood Learning Center and Boys and Girls Clubs of Larimer County. Our efforts to unite nonprofits and services in community hubs countywide are truly redefining what it means to be a Larimer United. When we all come together and pitch in, we have the potential to be part of something greater than what any of us can do alone. We can build a brighter today and generations to come. The opportunity to thrive is the bedrock of the American dream. At United Way of Larimer County, we are dedicated to turning this dream into reality. Thank you for joining us in being a Larimer United for healthy kids, healthy families, and a thriving community.
All right, we are back, and so we left off where we were talking about the journey and accepting and building the life that you like. It's your responsibility, right? It is definitely your responsibility. During the break, I started thinking, part of that, the struggle that come along with that, especially with most people, I think part of it is the uncertainty. If you don't know, most people need to see where they're going, right? Most people need to see it. But the biggest thing, I believe, and I could be wrong, is most people don't know how to surrender to the process, right? Because they don't understand it. In your thoughts and opinion, when it comes down to people transforming their lives, what is the biggest challenge that most people will go through as they begin to follow that path?
Yeah, it's definitely like an evolution of trust. And even the trust can start disappearing into something more profound where it's like, oh, I'm me now. I'm this new version, but I'm supported by something bigger, and that's faith. That's what a lot of people who are on the journey of becoming start accessing. And it doesn't have to come in a big full swoop, but like the little droplets, the little breadcrumbs matter. And I think sometimes people discount that and they want the whole enchilada right away. And it's like, really, it's about building that relationship of trust, and that it is okay just to have the breadcrumbs in the beginning of those little nudges, those little noticings of like, okay, I'm going to try this thing out. And simultaneously, like for me, what happened was like, I could look back on my life and notice like when I stuck with something, I saw the fruits of it, and I lined up all the proof of that in my life. And so I think it can be helpful too. Like, when I wanted to make the soccer team, that meant I really needed to train really hard, and I had to show up every day. And I ended up working with my best friend who played pro soccer so that I could be good enough, because I wasn't at the level of anybody else on the team. I was way below that. And so it's like, but when we put in the work, it's an everyday process. Forgiveness is an everyday practice. It's almost like playing a sport. And so thinking, to yourself, it's like, for people, it's like, what's evidence where you've really stuck with something and you've seen the fruits of your labor? So there's two components there. There's the faith of building through the breadcrumbs of like those little nudges, those little intuitions. But then there's the longevity of witnessing and noticing where's the proof where you've been able to do something before and you've stuck with it. And so both of those components are really important, and they matter when we're wanting to transform and live out our heart's desires. Like, we have to have the consistency and the willingness to stick through it, even if it doesn't look like it's working. But then we have the breadcrumbs in the beginning that say, like, let's start on this journey and let's trust it. And maybe the faith starts to grow and get bigger, just like a muscle that we're growing. So it's like a sport, It's an evolution.
I love that. Part of that is mindset too, right? But I think you touched on something. And it's building the trust with yourself, right? Because during this process that you have to go through, the biggest challenge is, do you trust yourself to do what is necessary to see this thing through, right? Even when you don't see the results right away. And the reason why I say that, because one of my biggest challenges that I had going, as I began to grow into who you see today, was trusting myself to do what was necessary. Right? I trust myself to feel the emotion without falling apart, or without having the thoughts of saying, I don't want to do this anymore. Because I will tell you, in the beginning, I didn't. It was a struggle. I didn't trust myself to take the next step because I didn't see it, right? Everything was dark. And I said, if this is what I got to go through, I don't think I want to do that. Mm-hmm. It was a lot of talking myself out of that. Now, and what the way that life worked on me a little bit, it brought people into my life to where people destroyed that aspect of trusting me. So when the right people came along, they looked just like the other people, and I wouldn't even give them the time of day. It's like, no, why would I do that, right? Because they have a tendency of talking just like the next person did, although their intentions was good. But I think a lot of that comes from being in tune with your intuition, right? And listening to what your body is telling you. And again, trust. When people don't trust themselves enough to do the right thing, what are some of the steps that we can get them to change, to develop that mindset, to get them on the right path to begin to, because I believe in challenging people. Like, challenge yourself like, let's do some challenges to develop that confidence within you, to develop that trust that you ultimately need to build the life that you want. Mm-hmm. What are some of the challenges that you may see?
Yeah, for me personally?
Yes.
So when I was living in Albuquerque, it was like shortly after college, and I loved drinking in college. Like, I drink a lot, and I loved it. You couldn't convince me there was a better time. And I took that with me after college, and it was so disorienting because I was like, here I'm trying to be a professional, but I love partying. And I started recognizing, I was like, shit, I can't be 25 and drinking like I'm in college, but it was like such an ingrained habit of what I loved doing. And I was like, I can't even be the person I want to be if I keep drinking like I'm drinking. Right. And that's really when I started getting into meditating. And so what I really love sharing with people is like just forming some sort of meditation practice first thing in the morning. Because what happened was I still was drinking and I was meditating. Like, my habits didn't go away overnight. And I think people think like, oh, the habits are just going to go away. For some people, like some people are cold turkey. I that's not my experience. And so doing the right things while you still may have these old habits is so profound, because then the old habits can start going away as you get more and more of this new influence in life. And so the drinking slowly stopped over time, of like the drinking heavy to numb my feelings. And that was beginning to be replaced through the meditation habit. And then the feelings I was experiencing through meditation started to touch my life so profoundly that I didn't need the alcohol to feel a certain feeling. The meditation was replacing that. And so I feel it's so profound for people to develop some sort of everyday practice, really, of meditation or whatever it is, if it's a walk outside, but just something that is a positive thing. And if you slip and you go into the old habit, that you still have your new habit every single day, no matter what. Because I think people can get off track. They're like, well, I'm not transformed yet, so I'm going to quit this new habit that's really awesome and then go back to the old one. But the purpose is really to be with the new habit and give yourself grace when you fall off the wagon, and to just keep coming back until that completely replaces the old habit.
I love that, because you said a few things there, and I want to step into this part of the healing journey, right? Because I think that is a vital part of it. The healing that comes along with that, it comes along with a few different things. There's a self-awareness that comes along with that, so you get to know yourself a little bit more. Where it comes from. Of yourself during that process, because if not, you're just going to become very, very destructive. And so you have to be able to look at yourself and go, I deserve better, but it starts with you, not dependent on anyone else, but it starts with you. The second part of that, becoming more aware of your emotions, so you learn how to regulate those things. And that becomes more of the awareness, and then the intelligence. So there's levels to all of these different things, right? But the healing process is so revealing that you have to literally be honest with yourself along the journey, because the slightest little tweak in your story will throw off everything. Then you have to go back and really figure out what that kink is, and you have to reconnect it. I think part of the challenge is you have to redirect your mindset, because your brain is designed to keep you safe. So you have to go in there, because as you're going through it, it will show you glimpses of the truth. And if you're not paying attention, those glimpses are just like that. But they're there. So you have to go in and say, no, show me. Then you have to force yourself to remember. One of the questions that we have from Shai over Instagram: how do you know when you are healed?
That's a beautiful question.
It is.
Yeah. So I think there's a couple ways to look at that too. It's like, we may feel healed in one area of our life, but now we're ready to look at another area. So for me, healing's really a journey. It's like, okay, I've looked at this area in the journey of becoming. It's like, I've looked at these relationships that felt like they held me back. Those feel healed. Okay, now I'm looking at all the other habits in my life. So I think healing happens in layers, and you'll notice one area of your life that feels healed because it feels so much better to you. You have boundaries in place. You have a baseline way of being that you're not constantly overstepping anymore. It might just be like little tweaks like this. And so you can notice, because you're just feeling better in that specific area, and you're up for the challenge of life. And then life is feeling like an exciting adventure instead of a bag that's kind of holding you down. Like, oh, I gotta keep healing this thing. And it can be a threshold moment too, of crossing a threshold.
I want to add to that, because you're absolutely right. I think part of the healing journey, as you begin to heal, you stop seeking validation from other people, right? You stop looking to them to say, oh, you did good, right? I was listening to to another speaker, and she said something that really sticks with me to this day. She was in a really bad situation with her son, and she told her son, we'll never be this broke again. We'll never be in this situation, because she was homeless, right? And she goes, I'll never be this broke again. We'll never have to struggle like this again. And what she did is that she changed everything, and she went out there, and she built everything else from the ground up. Part of that was her self-talk. She began to say, once she got into a place, she began to look in the mirror, and she began to tell herself, I love you. Right? I love you. And she says, the reason why I said that is because just in case if no one tells me today that they love me, I told myself. And that is the most important thing that you must do. That is also part of the healing journey, right? Because when you can look at yourself in a mirror and you can honestly say, I love the person that I see, it doesn't matter what anybody else thinks about you. Everybody's opinion, it doesn't even bother. It has nothing to do with you, right? There's people out there that probably think that, I'm the craziest person on earth. It doesn't bother me. I would say I'm not the craziest person, but I gotta, I'm slightly there,
Yeah.
I'll hit you with a snowball. I will, I have no problems with doing that, So, I look at those things, but I love me first. I love me first. When my feet hit the ground, I know that I'm going to be okay. I love me first. So nothing else really matters to me, right? And don't get me wrong. I have some pretty fucking amazing people in my life. I do. That support me along the way, that have been with me for quite some time. But they know, they all know, hey, before you even say anything, let me talk to me first. Right? Let me check myself. Let me go. Am I checking the boxes with myself? I ain't trying to check the boxes with nobody else. Right? Let me just check the boxes with myself. Let me make sure that my mind is where I need to be in order to go out into the world to face the challenges that may come along with that. So I think part of that healing journey that you're on starts with, one, trusting yourself, talking to yourself as if you're someone that's worth being loved, regardless if anybody else gives that to you. Talk to yourself with that sort of respect, right? When you find yourself going into a dark place, I say turn around and face it, right? Because that darkness, there's something else inside of there that maybe you need to go in and address, right? Because throughout all of that, you'll come out the other side a little bit different than who you are. A colleague of mine said, yesterday doesn't matter. Tomorrow's not here. You'll never be the age that you are right now ever again. So all you have is these moments in your life. And if you could chunk your day up into those moments, you'll realize that you don't have bad days. You have challenging moments. Those moments are lessons that you need to grab onto in order to develop the mindset of intelligence, right? And self-awareness. Now, I could be wrong. Totally. What are your thoughts on that part of the process that you have to develop?
I think that's so beautiful. Yeah, it's about being with yourself every day. And for me, I love what you said about just telling yourself you love yourself, and that coming back to that as a baseline can be so profound. And I notice when I tell myself I love myself, my shoulders drop, my body softens. It's like we're not just here to have like mental health, good mental health. We're also here to be with our bodies that carry us every day. And so when we can combine the both of them with saying something affirming to ourselves. And it's like the body can feel good too. The body does so much for us. It carries us around every day. And so it's not, I think, just loving like quieting the mind chatter, having better thoughts. I think too, it's like in my experience, it's like really loving my body has been a really big part of it. And that they're two in tandem. It's not one or the other. And I think sometimes we can leave one out, but it's like they're both working together, and we can get them both online. That can be really, really beneficial. That was a big part that was missing for me for a little bit. It's like I was just meditating, but I wasn't doing any like body work or celebrating my body. And it's like, we're here having a human experience. And so we might as well also get in touch with that too, you know? And so that's been really profound and helpful.
I love that. I love that. Also, I want to pose this question to you and get your thoughts on this. So the grieving process that people will go through throughout their life it's going to be a natural thing. You know, my thoughts about it is grief is the deepest human connection that you will ever have to another human being. Well, because it involves a deep embedded, selfless act of empathy, right? To understand another person's journey, without judgment, right? But to be in that moment and to actually see who they actually are and to embrace that as a human being, right? To embrace that as a human being. But now there's other aspects to it, right? We've talked about the loss of your father to leukemia, and that also involves the relationship that you have with these individuals as well, right? And you may have people that you really don't care about, but you will still grieve that individual because of said relationship. And that can affect how you grow and develop in that grieving process. So now, when we think about the multi-layers of grief, how do you perceive that?
Yeah. Oh, this is such a good question. Yeah. So when my dad passed, I actually had 5 people pass that year, 5 loved ones pass. And so grief, it can be, you know, you're focusing on one thing and grieving that, but grief can also keep hitting us, and we have to keep going through the layers in tandem. And so that was like my experience with grief was like, I felt like I'd healed one layer and then I went back to the other layer. And I think that can be normal for people, is like, we think we've healed a layer, but then we come up here again. And so it's not like necessarily, in my experience, a linear process. It's more of a fluid movement with layers, because we're also accessing different memories with our loved ones or the experience we're grieving. So, you know, people even losing a house, you know, there's layers to that. And mine was like very classic of the grief model of like anger, sadness, you know, and then acceptance. It was all of the different layers that people talk about. And, you know, the first one was definitely denial. And we were in the hospital and we had news from the doctor. He had an incredible team who was caring for him. And the head doctor said, you know, we were he called us into a room, my family, and he said, I just want to give you a heads up. Your dad has about 2 weeks left. And I just started dry heaving in the garbage can. And it was really difficult because he really was having a hard time remembering us, because he came out of the ICU from a surgery. So his memory was also impacted. It wasn't just the leukemia. And so he was having a hard time even remembering who we were. And so there was like layers of grief and him not remembering us. But then there was like also like, oh, this isn't happening. So we ended up actually he was getting treatment in the hospital, but we ended up going to try to get him Rick Sampson oil, if you've heard of that. But okay. We were like, we're going to try this out. We're going to save him. We don't care that he's got 2 weeks left. So like the siblings were all like going to get this marijuana for him and like sneaking it into the hospital. They're like, they caught us. They're like, you can't be doing that. We're going to kick you guys out of the hospital if you do that again.
You're not supposed to do that, Kalen.
We were like, damn. And we were like feeding it into his mouth, and we left it with my stepmom. We're like, just give it to him all the time and he'll be fine. And then the next morning he passed. So it was like, darn. So, you know, there's these natural moments of like denial. Like we were like, we don't care what the doctors say. Like were. And that's like been a part of me in life too, as a characteristic of like, I'm just going to make this happen. We're just doing it. And we're sometimes like ignoring the feelings in our body of acceptance. And so like the grief journey for me has been learning to listen to those feelings in my body instead of always trying to overcome or make something happen, like listening to the cues of like, if there's a moment of grief, of sadness, to like really honor that. And so that grief journey really took me through that, like the denial. And then of course he passed and I was incredibly sad and then angry, like, why did this happen? And, you know, are there things I can change about, like, I was angry at the medical system and like, you know, food system. It's like all these things that I can't control. Right. And then, you know, that's really when I started working with somebody who is more in tune, like spiritually with emotions and, you know, the spiritual journey, but then also a psychotherapist, and could really process my grief. And so I think it's like really profound when we can work with somebody and they can help us through the grief, because it is a natural process, but it can feel like it's stuck in us if we're not willing to work through it properly. And that's when the paths of like turning to substances comes in, is like we're not willing to be with the actual layers of the grief. And so feeling those deeper can really help with the grief process. And so then it just kept evolving. It was like, okay, I've experienced sadness, and then now it's like I'm experiencing these future missed opportunities with him. So like, not, you know, he won't get to see grandkids run around the house that I grew up in. So then it's like the grief is then ongoing of like being with those layers every holiday or it's not just, you know, when the event happens. It's a process, but I really believe it's a tool of transformation so that we can access deeper joy in the present moment. So like, even though I was sad on the holidays, once I felt the sadness, there was deeper joy to access. And so that's why grief, I believe, can be an ongoing transformation process in our lives of being more of who we are, that it's not like a bad thing to experience the sadness. It can unearth deeper layers of who we're meant to be, and then transform when those moments aren't there, you know, of like getting to do the holidays a certain way or getting to these moments a certain way that they would have been. It's like, what do I want to create now? So it has depth and room for your authenticity to come forward. So that can be a tremendous gift of people who pass. They're giving us authenticity also. So even though there's sad moments of people leaving, there's gifts they're giving us too that are wrapped up in those experiences that we can access if we're willing to be with that process. Yeah.
I love that. And as we begin to wrap up this segment of the Grief Let's Talk About It podcast, I only have a couple more questions for you. The first one would be, if you can give someone out there some healthy tips to help them out, what would you tell them that is experiencing something similar?
Yeah, don't give up on yourself. That you're the hope. The hope isn't out there. The hope is in you deciding that it gets to be different. And it's not easy, but it's about a journey, and to give yourself grace in the process. Mm-hmm. And it's not a short finish line. It's a beautiful journey if you're willing to stick with it, and that you can do it.
I love that. Second one, how can people find you?
Yeah, people can connect with me at KalenOlson.com, Kalen Olson, Olson. And then I'm most active on Instagram too, same handle, Kalen Olson. And I just want to say thank you so much for having me. This has been such an honor, and it's actually a special day because my brother ended up passing while he was in rehab for alcohol, and today's his birthday. So I think it's such a beautiful time to be doing this podcast with you. And he didn't take life too seriously. He was always joking around. So I think there's a beautiful process of grief to be in the sad moments, but then the gifts people bring us, and that it's all beautiful too.
Well, I'm gonna say this. Thank you for sharing such a precious moment with us today and coming on the show and having such a great conversation and being open and vulnerable and sharing your insight on a lot of this as well. Right. So thank you for that. Thank you. It's such a huge honor for that. So now my next question and last question would be, if Kalen had a superpower, what would it be?
Fly.
Ooh,
Yeah, I've always wanted to fly.
okay, okay, I love that. Well, we're going to wrap this one up, Kalen. Thank you so much. And just hang out real quick. I'll talk to you after the show. For everyone else out there that has been tuning in, thank you for the comments and the questions that you guys put in there. For everyone else, if you haven't already and you're not tuning in on the YouTube channel, please head on over there. Look, it's all down there at the bottom. We live stream, like, share, comment, subscribe. You know what I'm saying? We got a Patreon up. Become a member. You know what I'm saying? All the information is up at the top over there. We're on Facebook. We're on Instagram. We're on LinkedIn. Also, we're on the ETV, E360 TV. So that is a new element of the podcast that we've just added in. And if you enjoy these things, please do me a favor. Share it along with somebody who could benefit from the conversation that we have. You for your continued support. Thank you channel as well. It helps us content rolling out for you guys. With that being said, guys, Kalen's information is in the YouTube channel in the description. Reach out to her and tell her that you saw on the podcast, and tell her how much you enjoyed it as well. Kalen, thank you again. For everyone else, we're going to see you guys in the next one. We love you.
Thanks, Tony.
You're welcome.